Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to this meeting. Just a bit of housekeeping as normal. Fire practice not expected. So if the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. Designated assembly point is the public square in front of Cast, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. If there's anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs, where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. And no roll call is undertaken. Thank you. Now just check that everybody's got the mobiles on silent. As usual, the meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. So just to try and remember, everybody who's present, to use your microphones to ensure that the audio is captured. And any members of the public entering the council chamber accepting that images will be retained and broadcast by the council. We haven't got any members of the public in attendance, have we? Okay, thanks for that. Right, I'll just move on to apologies. I know I've got apologies from Councillor Jones and Councillor Khan. Are there any others to record? Okay, thank you. To consider the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting, and there are no issues on the agenda. Declarations of interest. I will declare that I work for a disability organisation because I think we might have some questions around that agenda, so just to be clear, put that on. There are no members of the public, so we don't have public statements. So we'll move straight on to the first agenda item, which is the corporate plan. So can I just ask officers who are here for that particular agenda item to introduce themselves, and we'll go around the members as well. So thank you.
Hi, Lee Tillman, Assistant Director in the Chief Exec's Directorate.
Alan Wiltshire, Head of Policy, Performance and Intelligence.
It's Councillor Kearsley, Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor Jane Kidd, Chair of this committee.
Caroline Martin, Senior Governance Officer, supporting this meeting.
Glynis Smith, Chair of Health and Adult Social Care.
Martin Greenhouse, Wallath and Tickerland, Vice Chair of Health and Social Care.
Nigel Cannon, Tickerland, Wallath Ward.
Gemma Cobbin, Town Ward and Chair of Overview Scrutiny for Communities Environment.
Leanne Hempshall, Chair of Children and Young People Overview and Scrutiny Panel in Roman Ridge Ward.
Steve Cox, member of many scrutiny things. Thank you.
Antoinette Drinkhill, Co-optive, representing the Anglican Diocese of Sheffield.
Thank you very much. I think that's everybody. So we'll move on to the corporate plan. Lee or Alan, you're going to introduce it. Did you want to sort of talk a bit about the prevention model, the community prevention model that we're going down? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just say a bit about the corporate plan first, and then as part of that to pick up the community prevention model and where we are, if that's okay. So in terms of the corporate plan, there are some similarities and some differences to the previous year's corporate plan. So just in terms of the similarities, obviously we're using our Doncaster Delivering Together framework, the focus on the wellbeing goals and the Great 8 priorities. You'll see those clearly represented in the corporate plan. But what we've done in this year's proposed corporate plan is try to be a bit more focused and sharper on our priorities and our contribution as a council to what is a partnership strategy in Doncaster Delivering Together. And there are a number of ways that we've done that. So as you'll see in the document, there are 10 priorities, 10 key priorities for us, and they're themed around organisational, people and place focused priorities. And really the aim of trying to do that is to really sharpen our focus as an organisation and be really clear who the lead cabinet member or cabinet members are for each priority and where the leadership from an executive leadership team from an officer perspective comes from for each of those priorities. And you'll see there's a brief description of each priority, and then there's a little bit more detail in the corporate plan around what that means in practice and what we're hoping to be achieving through 25. And there's a range of things that I won't go through all of them, but just to pick a few examples. We really felt that the importance of developing, empowering and refreshing our workforce is really fundamental to everything we're trying to achieve. So that it's no accident that that's a key priority in there. Also the work that we're doing around kindness, fairness, inclusion absolutely central to everything we do, and that's kind of writ large. And then we've got the priorities around improving adult social care outcomes, children's high-performing children's directorate, and obviously our key priority around South Yorkshire Airport City, etc. So you'll see that that's the kind of key frame. And then we've also set out as a priority, and it's quite a big priority, the contribution that the council will make to some of those key Team Doncaster plans and strategies, whether that's education and skills, our economic strategy, or our environment strategy. So that's a kind of big change in terms of how the corporate plan's laid out. And then just a couple of other areas that we've deliberately strengthened in this corporate plan is the connection to localities and communities. And you'll see there's a summary of the locality plans for each of the 4 localities that are included, because we felt it was really important that we make that explicit connection to that work that's increasingly focused in communities. And I'll say a bit more about that, what we're doing through 24-25 in a second. And then the other important element that's included in this corporate plan is specific reference to our ALMOs. And I think we've all spoken over the last year or so around how important and vital a role both ALMOs play in delivering the priorities for Doncaster. So specifically referencing their contribution to those priorities is included too. And then the final thing just to say around what's similar and familiar to the previous years is obviously that focus on our kind of service standards, those things that we report through the quarterly performance report, they're included as well at the back. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of what's different and what's the same in the corporate plan. And if I just say a little bit about where we are on the community prevention model, we had a really good session with OSMC, I think it was in November, as part of the baselining work that we were doing on community prevention. And we've been doing quite a lot of engagement. We've done over 100 hours worth of engagement with a whole range of different groups and forums, lead ward member meetings, partners, staff in the council, etc., around what's working, what can we improve, and how can we make sure that the work we do is ever more joined up, is ever more coherent, and has a best chance of achieving outcomes for communities. So we've just completed that baselining phase before Christmas. We're taking stock of that feedback as we speak, and then what we're proposing to do is to replay that back to stakeholders in terms of this is what we heard from you, and then here for the next phase, here's the set of capabilities that we therefore think we need to put in place to both build on the strengths that we've heard through that engagement process, but also to address some of the challenges. And I'll just give a couple of examples of some of those capabilities that we want to test with partners. So one of them is, how do we better organise ourselves in the council to make sure that our partners in Team Doncaster and yourselves as elected members and all communities can better engage with the work we're trying to do at a community level? Because what we heard through the baselining phase was that there's quite a lot of duplication of roles and responsibilities. The governance is not necessarily as clear and sharp as it can be. Some of our partners who want to do ever more work with us at that kind of very hyper-local level feel that some of that lack of clarity gets in the way of that engagement. We've also got, and I'm sure this may come up later, we've obviously got some budget pressures as well that we've got to address through this process. So one of the key capabilities that we're going to propose is, how do we better use the resources we've got to create better and clearer arrangements, officer support arrangements, to do that work at that very, very hyper-local level and that coordination at that local level. So that's going to be one of the key capabilities that we propose for the work. Another example will be, how do we make sure we streamline some of the meeting cycles and the meeting structures that we have, and make sure that those roles and responsibilities of those groups is really clear and how they're contributing to the bigger picture. And also making sure that we've got our Team Doncaster partners are fully engaged in the work that we do, and make that as easy as possible for those partners to do that. So there's quite a lot. I could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon on the work that we've done so far. I'm conscious of time. But what we will be doing as a next step is playing back that engagement and that baselining, and then coming up with a set of proposals to say, this is how we're going to both build on the strengths and address some of those challenges. And then, subject to the feedback we get through that rapid engagement process that will be taking place over the next kind of 4 weeks or so, we'll then seek to implement those and build those capabilities from early in the new financial year.
Thank you very much for that. I know we've got a question from Councillor Hempshall to start off with.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that, Lee. The plan continues to deliver ambitious targets at a time with reduced resources. What will be the most challenging to deliver, do you think?
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose the first thing to say, acknowledge the difficult context and the difficult circumstances we are operating in. Obviously, our budgets, as we're going to hear later, are, they're not getting any bigger, but our ambitions are not getting any smaller either. So I think one of the that's one of the reasons we wanted to be a bit more focused on priorities in the corporate plan and be really clear on those areas that we wanted to collectively make progress on. I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be how do we work with our partners where they've not got we don't have the kind of formal ways of what's the right word, mandating partners to work with us. It's much more around how do we influence and how do we work, make sure that there's an alignment of interests, shall we say, because we can't just mandate those partners to work with us, can we? We've got to do this in partnership. So having those shared objectives and those shared goals that meet each individual organisation's priorities and imperatives, and then make sure that we've got that alignment, I think is going to be one of the key drivers for us in this new financial year, to make sure that we get that alignment. And we're doing some work with our Team Doncaster partners over the next few weeks to make sure that there is that alignment in place as we go into 24-25. So the things that are bothering the NHS, the things that are bothering the police, the things that are keeping the Chamber of Commerce awake at night, we've got that clarity and that alignment of priorities so we can work together. There are also some big challenges where we've got other key stakeholders that we need to kind of influence and work in the same direction. So the airport is a great example where we've got, driven by Ros and Cabinet, some really strong ambitions to reopen the airport, but we're not in control of all the cards. We're having to play those cards the best way that we possibly can and make sure that we bring everyone with us on that journey. So I think that's going to be a challenge for us in 24-25. And there are many others, because the outcomes we're trying to achieve for Doncaster, we can't achieve them on our own, can we? Those outcomes can't be delivered by one organisation or one agency. It has to be done as a kind of collective effort, and it's ever more important, but it's also going to probably be harder to do as well as we go into the new year.
That's okay, Councillor Hampshire, if you've got any follow-up.
No, that's great. Thank you for that.
We've got a question from Councillor Cox next.
Thank you. How will the plan be communicated across staff?
Thanks, Steve. Really good question. I think there's a number of mechanisms that we've got. Some that we've used every year, and some that I think we can go further and faster on. So we've got a number of existing channels that we use. So we have our internal communication strategy that we're just refreshing and building, making sure that we've got messages that go out to staff on, for example, on Damien's weekly column around progress that we're making. We're also needing to translate, I think, ever more clearly those priorities that I've outlined through things like service planning, weekly team meetings, engagement that we do through the whole organisation as well. We also use it through our performance management framework, so our quarterly report that we bring, and it comes to scrutiny every quarter. That shows the progress that we're making, and that goes public, obviously, as well as internal. And we're going to be refreshing through the HR team our whole staff engagement framework in 24-25. So we'll be doing much more kind of face-to-face briefings with staff, communications via heads of service as well. So I think it's a multifaceted approach that we take, as well as when we've got particular initiatives or particular programs that we're communicating, we'll use that as well. So, for example, the work we do on Choose Kindness, or the work we've done on tree planting, environmental pride, etc., trying to show through that very practical activity how that activity is helping to deliver on the corporate plan ambitions.
So, is it a completely different way of communicating with staff then than it has been previously?
No, I think it's building on what we've got, Steve, because we've got some very established mechanisms. But I think what we're trying to do is just improve it all the time and make sure that we've got taken every opportunity to kind of embed the messaging, embed the communication. And that, as I say, that happens on a number of levels. We've always had service plans. We've always had kind of team engagement and opportunities to sort of embed through the organisation. But we want to do that more and more and connect it back to those key priorities that are in the corporate plan, so everyone can kind of see, well, what we're talking about here is focusing on the delivery of one of those key priorities that we've got in the plan.
This may be a question for another time when we explore it more, but I'm always interested in how much cross-partnership working there is throughout the structures, not just meetings happening at very strategic levels, but, you know, do you have people working together, and literally have meeting together even in localities to discuss, you know, issues?
Yep, absolutely, and I think we've got those mechanisms that have been in place for, you know, a number of years now, where we've got our, you know, bronze structure, our silver, locality silver structures, we've got our kind of lead ward member meetings and our ward member meetings. But I think, as I mentioned in the previous item, I think there's an opportunity to sharpen that more and get a greater focus on what are the key things that we're trying to achieve in particular places, and also show the progress that we're making against those. Because again, my perception is we've set out really good locality plans that's been based on lots of engagement, but what we've probably not done as well as we could is show the "you said we did." So what have we done as a result of that, and how can we highlight that progress much more? So one of the proposals we're going to look at for 24-25 is building the "you said we did" a bit more into the quarterly performance report, so we can be a bit more focused on, well, this is what we've done as a result of that feedback and what we've seen.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, you've got a few questions there.
So I'm really interested on how the corporate plan would ensure we work with partners to support and encourage employment for those with additional needs. And I've kind of split that into 3 different groups. So we'd obviously need to address all aspects, including interview, to support in employment. But as I looked at that, you know, we need to start with the application, really, and think about doing things in a different way so that we aren't giving people an impossible mountain to climb. Can we make any commitment on numbers of people that have additional needs that we do employ? Because I'm really interested that we don't just talk about it, we actually have some outcomes and some figures that show exactly what we've done. And the other thing that's really key is, would it include not disadvantaging individuals who currently have benefits, so that employment for them would be a real incentive? And I suppose, how is the council leading Doncaster on those issues? Because there are some really good best practice out there.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. And great question. I suppose there's a number of levels to this answer. So I'll give a few examples of what we're doing as an organisation, things that we've got in place, but also things that we want to do to improve as well. I'm conscious I've got Phil and obviously Rihanna particularly as well here, and if those colleagues want to chip in as well, and please do so. I suppose some of the things that we've got in place, we're already a disability confident employer, and we do already offer to make some of those reasonable adjustments that are required. And we're very proactive at trying to do that and make sure that those adjustments are in place. That said, I think I mentioned this probably in one of our previous meetings, we are looking at reviewing, or we are starting to review our recruitment and selection processes from end to end, taking into account some of that best practice that's there already, and the feedback from our current and potential future workforce as well. So again, couple of examples of that. We provide, for example, questions in advance, and we can provide those questions in advance of interviews for those people who need those adjustments. And we're going to be setting up and developing a disability staff network as well, along the lines of the Ethnic Fusion Culture Network, so we can make sure that the staff experiences, those who are in the workplace already, make sure that those experiences inform our plans as we go forward, and that will be one of a number of staff networks that we're encouraging to making sure that there's a clear framework for those networks to be in place. And then we want to work with, and I know we've exchanged emails, Glynis, to work with some of those groups that we've got that are already representing those with lived experience, who've got an external perspective to inform that review process as well, and make sure that those things that we put in place actually do genuinely work for communities. We also offer a range of other things as a council in terms of helping people to have tasters of work and understand what it's like. So work experience, work placements, etc. I think we can do more about communicating those and making sure that they're visible. We do have a single point of access on the website for anyone who does want to access any of those facilities, but I do understand that that's not always been as well communicated as perhaps it could have been. So we want to make sure that that's very visible, and we're very open around encouraging those things. And then, of course, in terms of those people who are on benefits and understanding their circumstances, we offer a range of flexible working benefits for anyone who works in council or is thinking of working in the council, to think about how their personal situation and circumstances, we can kind of tailor that support to make sure that we're as flexible as possible. And we are part as a HR team of a number of kind of national and regional networks, and make sure that we do increasingly take that best practice, and we're very open to taking that feedback and adjusting our approaches as far as we can. And then the final thing I would say, just around some of our recruitment and selection processes at the minute, I think we have quite a lot of flexibility in those processes already. Again, I think sometimes we've perhaps not used those flexibilities as much as we can, or maybe there's not enough awareness, and we need to do more awareness raising of how we can be flexible. So a good example would be around apprenticeship recruitment. I've heard this a number of times. Why do we ask everyone to fill in an application form, whether you're online, whether you're going for a head of service job, a director job, or an apprenticeship role? Well, actually, we don't need to do that. And we've got a number of examples now where, for example, young people who've attended our apprenticeship fairs, we've signed them up there and then. They don't need to fill a long form in and tell us all the qualifications that they've got, because it's not relevant when you know someone who wants to just think about an apprenticeship. So we're trying to be flexible with what we've got, but trying to build that voice and that lived experience into making sure some of those flexibilities are there for as we make sure our processes are as fit for purpose as they can in the future. It's not ever going to be a finished job. I think it's going to be a constantly iterative process where we take the feedback and we adjust as we go. I know we've done some really good work through the local account, for example, in adult social care as well. So Phil, I don't know if you wanted to comment, or Rihanna, if you wanted to add anything from your perspectives.
I mean, I think we've got a long way to go, I think. So I think Lee's set out the framework. And I think probably if you'd asked this question a year or two ago, you'd have had a compliance-based answer. We would have told you we had about all the policies we've got. But I think what Lee's describing is that as an organisation, we've got to go beyond just having the policies and think about the conditions, both for our staff who are working with us with disabilities at the moment, and the conditions of people outside the council. So I think that's the step forward that Lee's described. But we've got a long way to go, and our numbers are modest at the moment. There's no arguing with that.
Just in the interest of time, I think this is a subject we do want to look into further and keep coming back to. So thank you very much for your answers, and yeah, we'll certainly going deeper into it, won't we, Glynis? We've both got an interest, to say the least. I know a lot of us have. So I'll just to finish this bit off, I'll just ask Antoinette, if you could ask your question around the priority 10, that'd be great. Thank you.
So priority 10, the education and skills strategy, is rightly ambitious. Do we have in place equally ambitious and qualified partners to effectively deliver on the aspects within this highly important future-focused priority? And I gave an example for to deliver on the education, training and wider careers programme.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. I'll give an introduction, and again, if Rihanna wants to chip in, then that's absolutely fine. So I think the short answer is yes, we've got a really strong governance arrangement in place with a lot of the key partners around the table to support the delivery and implementation. So I'll just give some examples of some of those partners that we have represented in that governance framework. So Sheffield Hallam University, DN Colleges Group, Chamber of Commerce, sort of local training providers, crucially our schools, as well. And we have a portfolio board which Leanne chairs as Assistant Director for Skills, which brings all of those different partners together. And there's a number of work streams that sit underneath that are focusing on the delivery of different aspects of the strategy. And we also have some external advice and expertise and challenge as well that's helping us, because obviously you'll see from things like Remake Learning and others that we're trying to ground our approach in Doncaster based on national and international best practice where we can. So, thank you. There we are.
Yeah, and just to confirm everything that Lee is saying, Antoinette, we're doing a lot of work in making sure that we co-produce what learning looks like and how it feels in and outside of school. So we address it on various levels and layers, and we try to be as inclusive as possible in all of those conversations.
Thanks for that. I think it's really important, given the fact that the key theme of the corporate plan seems to be being outward focused and this clear kind of aspect of partnership working.
Thank you very much for that. We'll go on to the recommendations, page 1, paragraph 5, to review and provide feedback on the Council's corporate plan prior to its final approval on the full Council. Does the committee agree that it has sufficiently reviewed the plan?
Agreed.
Thank you. Is it supported?
Supported.
Okay. And actually, yeah, to make sure that we take any future scrutiny work planning, take into account the Grade 8 priorities. Councillor Kearsley?
Chair, can I move that we agree the letter in response to the corporate plan on behalf of the committee? Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. That means we need to get a letter out very quickly. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'll move on to agenda item 5, which is overview and scrutiny consideration of the Mayor's budget proposals. I need to sort of reiterate as normal that we need to ensure that the budget provides financial stability going forward, whilst recognising that pressures have increased the demand on some services, to say the least. To do this, the committee needs to address the information contained within the budget reports rather than identifying new proposals. We shouldn't look through the budget line by line. This will make it difficult to see the full picture, but need to focus on the wider outcomes. Therefore, obviously, making our questions relevant to the budget in front of us. So there are 4 quick key questions that we need to focus on. So I'm going to introduce, first of all, Debbie and Faye to give us an outline of the budget as presented. Then Julie Crooks from St Ledger Homes to do her bit, and we've got questions for that. And then we'll move into questions after that. So, yes, sorry, would the officers who didn't introduce themselves earlier just like to go around and make introductions, please?
Hi, I'm Debbie Hogg, Director of Resources.
Hi, Faye Tyers, Assistant Director of Finance and Technology.
Julie Crook, Director of Corporate Services, St Ledger Homes.
I'm Phil Holmes, I'm Director of Adults Wellbeing and Culture.
Hi, I'm Rachel Leslie, I'm the Acting Director of Public Health at the Council.
Good afternoon, I'm Rihanna Nelson, Director of Children, Young People and Families in the Statutory DCS.
Dan Swain, Director for Police.
Thank you very much. So I'll move over to Debbie and Faye to start off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report is looking at the Mayor's budget, and it's in the normal format. It covers the HRA, which Julie will say a bit more about. So I won't steal a thunder in that regard. The capital budget, which sets out the capital spending plans over a medium term. It's 1 year longer than the revenue budget, and it provides information in relation to the significant amount of resources that are being invested in the borough's assets, £507 million over the 4 years, and £193 million in 24-25. Predominantly, it's focusing on education, housing, infrastructure, and leisure services, and most of the money is in relation to where we've been in. We've either made grants or we've had the benefit of money coming into the council. There is a section within the capital programme where the council has made choices about making investments, and then the reason why that's structured in a way is that then a bit like it flows from that point into the revenue account. Because we'll need to borrow on the basis of the investment. In terms of the revenue budget, it's another year that's of significant challenge. Last year at the full council, the savings that were required in 24-25 tallied just short of £11 million. And what's been identified is further pressures of £13 million. In some parts that's service pressures, and in some parts it's pay and prices. As we all know, inflation's been running much higher than the resources we've got available to us. And the result of that, looking at what's available to us in terms of the setting of the maximum council tax and the levy and the social care precept, means that there is a shortfall over the medium-term financial strategy period of £17.3 million. There has been a late announcement, which actually might have been announced now, because I'm looking at Faye, because we're talking in real time. So we thought there'd be a further ministerial announcement on Wednesday, but we've just had, as we've been in this meeting, the public health allocations, as for example, and the indications of that £500 million in relation to social care precept, social care. We think it could be anything from 3.1 million to 3.7 million. We don't know the conditions associated. So the reason why I'm bringing it out into committee's attention is we were waiting for that detail to be announced, but it's not in the papers that you've received. So once we know the conditions associated, we'll be able to report on that. So basically what we've got in front of you is a balanced budget, assuming that there's further savings that need to be made, and that the council tax is maximised and the social care precept is taken up. In terms of the impact on the workforce, there's a reduction that would be managed through vacancies or natural through discussions of a reduction in FTEs of 23. So I hope you, from that, you'll probably appreciate that in the context of other authorities and the savings that they're needing to be made, and the impact that it's having on the organisation, we're in a really good place. It's like, as Lee just said, in part of the introduction to the corporate plan, it's a challenging environment, but in the wider context that others are experiencing, we're in a really good place to take us forward. Faye, do you want to say a bit more?
No, I think you covered it. I think it was just recognising in terms of dedicated schools grant, and that particularly remains challenging and of significant concern. So it is projected overspend of 29 million by the end of March 24, and then projected to increase. It's a ring-fence grant. There is a statutory override, which means we have to carry forward that balance. But I think it's just worth, within the context of the revenue budget, although it's a ring-fence grant, it's fits within that. Just recognising that pressure.
Thank you for that. Julie, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction?
Thank you. So the proposal for 24-25 is that rents increase by 7.7%, which is based on CPI from last September plus 1%, is the maximum that's allowed under government guidelines. And as last year, 1% of that rent increase will be ring-fenced for additional properties. So there are just in the region of 8,000 people on the waiting list in Doncaster. So in terms of setting Housing Revenue Council's budget, it's a balance between upkeep of the maintenance of the standards of the existing properties and trying to provide existing properties for the people that demand those houses within Doncaster. We are aware very much of the economic circumstances, and 72% of the tenants are on either universal credit or housing benefit, so they'll be unaffected by this increase, but that does still leave 28%, so there is support teams in place to help them sustain their tenancies, and we work hard with all the tenants that are in rent arrears that do contact us. There are two significant changes to the budget. So an extra £1 million that's been added in for the work on damp mould and condensation. So following the tragic death in Rochdale, there's been a lot more focus on damp mould and condensation. And actually, although we don't have a lot of damp mould and condensation in the properties, we do get a lot of inquiries from tenants and have to do a lot of surveys for those. And then there's an additional £1.1 million that's been built in the budget to deal with the increased cost of regulation. So the regulator of social housing is introducing new consumer standards from 1st of April 2024. So that's our estimated cost of those. The combined impact of those equates to 2.1 million or 2.4% of the rent increase. So that's to sort of fund those things. And in terms of some of the other things that we wanted to mention, the budget for next year does budget for an increase of property numbers, and that is the first time that we've budgeted for that since the introduction of the right to buys in October 1980. So that's the first time that there's been a budget of increased property numbers since the right to buy was introduced all that time ago. And in terms of, there's also an increase in employee numbers within St Ledger Homes, particularly for apprentices, so trade apprentices. So they're very difficult to recruit skilled employees at the moment, so we're trying to grow our own. So there's growth for trade apprentices, and there's also growth for 2 building surveyor apprentices, because of part of the regulatory requirements is that all landlords will be required to survey their properties on a 5-year basis, so every property every 5 years. So in Doncaster that equates to about 4,000 properties to be surveyed each year. And so consequently, because all landlords need to do that, it's very difficult to appoint building surveyors. So we are relying on external consultants, but we are again trying to grow our own for that. And in terms of future assumptions about rent increases, so the assumptions in the budget are 3% for 25-26 and 2% after that. The current regulation on rent expires after the 24-25 financial year, so the government will need to consult again about future rent policy within the next 12 months. And I noticed there was a question about net zero. So we are on track, and the budget does include enough funding for to achieve EPCC by 2030, but the gap to achieve net zero is 314 million, as outlined in the report, and there isn't funding available for that because that's sort of been a change of the rules since the HRA went self-financing in 2012, and the government set the sort of funding arrangements for that at that time.
Thank you very much for that. Don't know if you feel it's been covered, Councillor Kersley, but you've got a question, haven't you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a really good introduction. Thank you. You may have covered some of this already, so I'll be aware of that when I ask. But like you said, rent levels are going up by 7.7%. How do you feel this will meet, or will it meet, the requirements of service delivery and challenges faced by rising inflation and other pressures? Obviously, note that you mentioned about how only a percentage of council tenants are not on housing benefit or anything like that. But obviously, things like inflation affect St Ledger itself. You know, things like repairs and cost of materials and stuff. Thank you.
So we have a detailed 4-year budget for the housing revenue account, and then we try, and the rent funds all day-to-day services, and it also funds long-term investments, so sort of roofs and kitchens and bathrooms and those types of things. So we also have a fairly detailed sort of medium term, which is 10 years for that. We do have a 30-year spreadsheet, so we try to make sure there's sufficient funding to maintain the Decent Homes programme over 30 years. But obviously, the further out you get, the assumptions become a lot more guesswork, I think, is what we do for that. And what we are seeing, as we've seen for all council services, is increased demand for services. So we're seeing increased repairs, increased calls for tenants that are in rent arrears and things like that. So we're trying to be more efficient with those things in the way that we work and how we use technology for some of those services, because there's the additional demand on those services. There remains the high level of people on the waiting on the register, so we're trying to register those applications as quickly as possible, but be realistic about the possibilities of them getting council accommodation and encouraging them to look for other options, because we do only get about 1,400 empty properties a year. So in terms of the people that will get those properties, yes, we've been as prudent as we can be about future levels of inflation, and a lot of that is spent on the capital programme, and there has been increased costs for that. We've seen that with new electrical contractors, but what we've seen for that, we have built it into the budget, and where possible we deliver as much work as we can with our own workforce. So the St Ledger workforce deliver £12 million of the capital programme, and £2 million of the capital programme is delivered by the council's building services through aids and adaptations. So obviously that is our first choice where we can to deliver the capital programme. So they're the main things we're looking at to try and balance the rent increase and the demands going forward.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
It's going back, rewinding a little bit, but it's not just to Julie, but you know, when we talk about growing our own, which I know what it means, but what does it actually look like, not just for St Ledger, but across the board? Because, you know, there's that kind of knowing what we lack in Doncaster. Like example, I think at one point we didn't have any speech and language therapists, or a real lack of them. So when young people are sat in schools thinking what career should I have, often they might pick something that's going to take them away from Doncaster rather than keeping them here. So it'd be great to link in with schools and colleges so that they've got an heads up on what we actually are lacking, and then it'd be easier for them to progress as well and keep them in Doncaster.
Just to give you some assurances, Councillor Ameshaw, we are doing that through our education and skills strategy. So we, for example, have got an NHS foundation school within the borough, so Hallcross, and they link up very closely with the hospital trust in terms of creating pathways for young people to access education and training into specific routes. We also know that from our social work, for example, we've got a shortage of social workers. We're growing our own. We are also investing in our newly qualified social workers quite extensively, and I can give you some details around that. So yes, we are starting to grow our own. We also have our centres of excellence within the education and skills strategy that are linked to specific areas of growth. So for example, health and care is a centre of excellence, and within that we're looking at the pathways, where the pressures are and how we create those pathways, and do it in bite sizes as well. The other centre of excellence is engineering, the other one is creative and digital, and the fourth one now escapes me. Help me. Green tech. There you go. So we've got all of these centres of excellence that are specifically focused around the economic growth strategy and how we then grow our education system and throughput through our schools. So we are doing that.
Thank you.
Jane, do you want to say something around the council's approach to apprenticeships at this point, or?
I think this is obviously something that we need to be looking at further depth, but for the sake of today's agenda, we'll just move on at the moment. But thank you anyway, thank you. Yes, so we would just want each director in turn just to outline, you know, the main risks for the directorates, confidence in delivering services, and, you know, does the proposed budget meet your service needs? So I think we've got Phil to go first. Thank you.
Thank you. So my service responsibilities are adult social care, strategic commissioning of health and care, domestic abuse, culture and heritage services, and kind of homelessness services, especially in connection with complex lives, just so people are clear about that. And I think the council's proposed budget does as much as possible within the constraints that the council's budget has to meet the needs of those services. So I'm pretty assured that kind of when the council's allocating budgets that aren't ring-fenced, it does everything it can to support people who would otherwise be at risk. So I kind of feel assured about working in this council in that regard. I also feel assured that the council kind of doesn't see culture and heritage as some kind of optional luxury, and kind of recognises how culture and heritage supports the well-being of people in Doncaster, and is also a source of income generation in terms of external investment. So I kind of feel like in terms of my portfolio it's well supported. The pressures that my directorate's faced, the type of pressures haven't changed over the last year. So you've still got huge pressures in Doncaster's communities that are affecting the health and well-being of people. They're increasing the likelihood of people needing adult social care support. It could be adult. No, it could be adult social care on the line. So you know, the chances of people needing adult social care support in terms of those pressures, the chances of domestic abuse being an issue in terms of those pressures, the chance of homelessness being an issue, those issues are still out there in Doncaster's communities. We're also under a bit of pressure from our NHS because of the pressure that they themselves are under. So there's pressure, for example, to discharge people from hospital more and more quickly. And there's also financial pressures the NHS have. For example, they have pressure on their NHS continuing healthcare budgets that also can have an impact on the council. So it's probably more important than ever that the council and the NHS work pretty closely together on these sorts of areas. In terms of how well equipped we are, most of our spend in adult social care, so probably best if I focus on that. When we look at comparable councils, we do support more people, proportionately more people in care homes than other councils do that are comparable socioeconomically, and we support less people via adult social care in their own home than other councils do proportionately. And I think that's a problem. That's a problem for us. We also, when we compare with other councils, tend to spend higher amounts on average for younger adults, so adults of working age who live in care homes. So again, we need to get under that factor, because we can't look at Doncaster and say that should be the case. We have to do some work on why that is the case. So there are things that we need to do, and we're already on with doing in both of those areas. The underlying point, I think, is helping more Doncaster people live in their own homes without restrictions, doing the sorts of things that they want to do, which links with Councillor Smith's question about employment earlier on as well, because having the right to access employment, you should have that right in relation to your disability or other kind of conditions. So again, that's an important indicator. We have already improved our approach to people accessing preventative information, advice and support in adult social care, and we're building on that further this year. So it's about making sure that fewer people get to the position where we're starting to talk about care homes, and in particular we need to work with our hospital, because quite a few people are leaving hospital going to care homes when probably we should be getting, collectively us and the NHS should be getting them back home again. We've definitely increased our understanding of rough sleepers over the last year and their routes to rough sleeping. So even though those bigger pressures are out there, we're starting to turn the corner around reducing the number of rough sleepers in Doncaster. So since the pandemic, we've been at higher and higher year on year. Over the last financial year, we've just started to reduce those numbers, but it's obviously a big headwind that we're up against when we're trying to sort that out. And in terms of culture and heritage, we've not put any additional savings onto culture and heritage this year, but they've still got a big agenda to deliver the savings they were already given, which are about just being more efficient and about generating income and making the most of Doncaster's assets. So for us, it's probably, we're trying not to overload services that we've already got a lot on, and try and get them to deliver what they already need to do. So yeah, I think we're in a reasonable position compared to some other councils, not without its challenges, Chair, will be my summary.
Thank you very much for that. Rachel, I think we've got you next.
Yep, so I'll respond particularly for public health. Anything that's broader with Office of Chief Exec, we can come in with Lee as well. So just in terms of public health, it's funded mostly through the Public Health Ring Fence grant Debbie mentioned earlier. We've just had notification of our funds for next year, which represents a really small uplift, around 2.2%, which in real terms represents a consecutive 9-year real terms cut in public health funding. So with all of the moral and financial case for investment in prevention, we're not seeing that through in the allocation of a ring fence grant. We do have small pots of additional funding for particular initiatives. The Supplemental Substance Misuse Grant would be an example of that. But what that means for us in terms of context is that we're not able to invest further in our services, both our mandated and non-mandated services. So where we've either got a growth in demand because of a population change, or we have evidence of something new that we might want to build into services, or we've got an increase in acuity or complexity of needs, we're not able to make that additional investment in our services, and we haven't been able to through the course of the last few years. Looking at particular risks for services, most of our mandated services are provided by NHS providers, and you'll know or you'll see that those employees working in those services have had well-deserved pay awards and uplifts. So where we've got our contracts in place, they're all fixed fixed cost contracts, so not a cost in volume. So if they do more of particular things, it's not a cost per activity. So they provide within the specifications and the contracts that they've got in place. However, they will have to make those pay uplifts for all of the staff working in them. Just to bring a bit of life to that, that's our health visiting service in Doncaster, our school nursing service, drug and alcohol services, and infection prevention control services. Sexual health services are provided by a non-NHS provider, Solutions for Health, but they still have staff on NHS terms and conditions. For this year that we're currently in, those pay uplifts have gone directly to services through the ICB, so they've not even touched us in public health. We've got no guarantee that that will happen next year, and for Solutions for Health, we've had to support them through a really complex national process for them to apply for those pay uplifts that they're still waiting to hear back from. So the risk for us then is that we've potentially got a higher salary bill that will have to be met. We do hold a reserve to be able to meet that, and should we have to apply that, there's a few things that would allow us to do. So in reality, it's working with services on what they might do less of or what they might stop doing in order for us to still be able to meet the costs of everything that we've got responsibility for funding through the ring fence grant. Just mention as well, something else that we've got as a cost pressure is our infection prevention control service. So you'll know that in previous years we've had additional funds through COVID that have allowed us to up our local authority health protection role, and particularly have an infection prevention control service. This helps with system flow into residential settings and other things, but also helps us with some of the unexpected things that we've had this year, scarlet fever, measles that we're currently hearing about, and even things like avian influenza. So we would say that we need to maintain that service currently. That's all, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. We'll move on to Rihanna next.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kidd. So I think it's really important to start us off with, when you look in the budget report under paragraph 41, it sets out the principles that we as Children's Services take in relation to managing demand and capacity within the place. As Phil says, I'm encouraged by the position that that we are corporately taking as to where we invest our money. I'm encouraged that we continue to invest in early help services. That is really important to stem the flow and to help our families to be resilient within their communities. What I would also say is we take our responsibility of corporate parents really seriously, and within the principles that you've seen in the report, it talks about keeping children for as long as possible within their home environment, as close to their homes as possible. So that means being educated in the mainstream school close enough to you for you to stay as long as possible within your families. But where there are additional needs, we do then have to have the right services in the right place. I think that main risks for us in terms of our service delivery, if we take the services that I'm directly responsible for, so that's early help schools, as well as children's social care, youth and the partnership, and then I'll talk a little bit about the special educational needs part differently because of the high needs block pressure. So in terms of the main risks to our service delivery, first, it is demand. Our demand remains high. We receive around 2,000 contacts every month. We have got around 2,500 children open to children in need, and we've got a significant number on the child protection register. So demand remains significantly high for us, and the more that we can invest in early help, the less we will see that demand increase. But what I can say is that demand is stabilised but remains high. What I would say is, in terms of the other risk that we have, is complexity. So we see more families but with greater complexity presenting, and quite a quick escalation. So normally we would know families within early help, and they then escalate potentially into higher tier services. We see a lot of stuff coming into our front door social care that we haven't known before about. So we need to invest more in early help, building resilience within the communities to support those families in communities. Domestic abuse, neglect, parental substance misuse remains high, and the things that we are worried about and that we're trying to tackle on a systemic level. The other thing that I would say is, in terms of our workforce, we've got high numbers of agency staff. We're trying to address that by having a workforce strategy group that specifically looks at the hard to recruit to roles. So children's social workers, we've got a wonderful cohort of 16 newly qualified social workers that started with us in October. We are using a specific typology model to induct them into the way that we want to work and to the good principles of social work. That's how you retain social workers, is by training them really well and making them feel psychologically safe. So we've got a 16 cohort of 16 that started. We've got another 16 starting in April, 10 of which is international, and the other will be our local recruits that we're recruiting. And so we will continue, but embedding that really good principal social workers. So I'm expecting to see a reduction now the number of agency workers that we have towards the middle of next year, which is fantastic. I think the other thing for us to also talk about is the difficulty that we have about recruiting residential workers. Our strategy in terms of looking after children that goes into residential care is to have our own residential homes. At the minute, we are struggling to recruit social workers to actually facilitate those specific residential workers. But again, we've got a campaign out in recruiting residential workers, making sure that there's some robust training and support mechanisms in place for them. It's really important that we continue to recruit foster carers. We don't have enough foster carers, so if you know of a family member that can be our foster carer, please recruit them, let them have a conversation, and if you've got any spare time, please talk to us about becoming a foster carer. Always a plug to have for a good foster carer. And so we need to recruit more of them. That will keep our children closer to home as well, and it will be at a much reduced cost. In terms of just to give you an idea, although we are managing things really well since the transition of the Children's Trust to the Council, we can see over the last 18 months we've really gripped financially what's going on, and we also have invested a lot of time in good social work practice and good decision making at the earliest point. That means that our looked after numbers, our children in care numbers, have actually in real terms come down if you exclude the unaccompanied asylum seeking children cohort that we are welcoming as well, and I'll come on to that. So our children in care numbers have gone down rather than up, and it's gone down quite significantly. So that's a real positive for us, because that means that we're intervening earlier and we're preventing children from coming into care. In terms of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, around a fifth of all of our children in care now is unaccompanied children. So that's about 20%, and it's about 100 young people that we supporting under the age of 25. So that's a significant increase, and we need to deal with that. When we have young people that need placements, when we try to find those placements, although we are managing the numbers down, the real issue for us is the market forces. So we are paying around £50,000 to £70,000 more per placement on average for a residential placement externally. That is significant. That is not something that we are responsible for, other than for the fact that we should be commissioning those places, and we should be managing the placement cost. That is impossible in a market where there is not enough placements available to children and young people. So those are some of the main risks that I see in terms of us delivering. However, I'm confident that we are on a positive trajectory, and that our overspend, for example, this year has come down significantly, and we will continue to work on that. The priorities for us in this area is to focus on recruitment and retention, driving those agency numbers down, practice improvement. Good practice costs less. So the better we do for our children and young people, the closer we keep them to co-production and making good decisions, the better we will fare in terms of and investing in early intervention. And then we will continue to manage the market as best as we can, creating strategic partnerships with providers where necessary, and block purchasing, for example, as an example of good commissioning principles. And then we've got the big national guidance that's come out around working together to safeguard children, which proposes some significant changes in the way that we deal with children under the children in need threshold in terms of family help, integrated working with partnership as well. So that's the bit on children's social care. If I can move on to the special educational needs and the high needs block. As Faye indicated, there's some significant pressure for us around the high needs block, and that continues to increase. That is a national issue that we are all facing, and although it is significant for Doncaster, it is, I would say, better managed than what it is in other places in terms of the projected overspend. There is a statutory override in place, but that's due to come off in March 2026. We are waiting further guidance from government about what that looks like. We are hoping that the DfE will realise that we've got significant pressure and that this is a policy issue rather than local management issue. We are part of the Delivering Better Value in SEND project, which means that the DfE has employed other partners to come and have a look at how we are managing our SEND budget, where we can make further reductions in how we spend the money and investing in the right places. We've got some assurances that we are investing it in the right place. However, even with their further guidance or outcomes or principles that they've identified for us to apply, we will only see a reduction of £2 million in the projected overspend in the coming years, year on year. That will not wipe out the overspend that's currently projected. In terms of the risks that we face within SEND, it's similar to social care demand. So we have seen a 41% increase in the the applications for education, health and care plan. That is significant. And we are managing or maintaining 30% more education, health and care plans than what we did 2 years ago. That's around 2,500 education, health and care plans that we are managing at the minute, and that keeps on increasing. There is a complexity to what we are seeing again within presenting needs, and we are also seeing a shift in where the priorities lie around that. So a shift away from autism diagnosis or autism presentations to more social, emotional, mental health presentations. We also know that our children face speech and language difficulties. And that means that our provisions are not always in the right place at the minute. We know that we need to do more in mainstream school to support our young people through a graduated approach. So do more in school, manage more in school, and that where we can't, where children need additional support, that we do it through a targeted approach, and that our alternative provision and special schools need to be of high quality. We need to, for example, have more behaviour interventions focusing on getting children back into school rather than putting them in, continue to put them in special schools where they could have integrated back into mainstream schools. Market forces remain the same. We're paying more for educational placement, again, similar to what we're doing for children's social care. We need to work better with our partners. We have got a really strong special educational needs partnership with health and education, but we can do more in terms of, for example, joint commissioning further upstream earlier in the process. We need to continue to recruit a highly qualified workforce. Again, we've got some struggles in particular parts, like, for example, SEND officers in recruiting them, but we're doing all we can to do there. And then the big thing for us is to co-produce with our families. So we've got a transformation program in place. And at the minute, for example, Leanne and I are intending to see around 376 parents who indicated that they would want to come and talk to us about the offer and how we can better do better in what we do. So co-production is a key point for us. And we believe that when we are co-producing with parents and we do proper wraparound provisions for children and young people, that will improve their outcomes and it will cost us less. So I think that's where I am in terms of that. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Move on to Dan next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Dan Swain. I'm the Director for Place. Much of my services are centred around economy and growth, environment regulation and neighbourhoods, strategic housing and sustainability. So predominantly visible, tangible stuff that you'll be aware of, that you interact with me on a regular basis. My comments really just on the overall budget here. It's very positive to be in a position that we're in because quite a lot of authorities aren't. And I think that's credit to both the politicians and particularly the staff as well for being able to do this year on year now. The risks for me centre really around the fact that, as Debbie Hogg indicated earlier, my colleague, there is £11 million of previously agreed savings or income or areas of pressure, together with what's been put in additionally for the position now between here and 26, 27. So the challenge that I have and the risk to my services are on the achieving of some of those savings and the realisation of some of that income. Because at any point in time during that 3 to 5 year period, if we don't, I end up with a cumulative effect. And that cumulative effect is not always a negative one. It can be that I get money in over and above what was anticipated, which can relieve the pressure. So it's that consequential impact for me of the failure to deliver the savings or failure to deliver the income. And there are some external factors which are actually in the Cabinet report at paragraph 97, but in particular, risks for me would centre around perhaps the asset rationalisation programme, which I do want to be clear, that's not just a reduction of assets, that's also a maximisation of assets, because we've got quite a lot of tired assets that we've not got the capital investment for, so we really need to work with you as community advocates and the political leadership to deliver what we can on that. But the example I would give, if that doesn't materialise the savings, it will have to be found from somewhere else within or across my directorate or within or across the authority. And what I am heartened by, and I think is a positive commitment by the ruling administration, is defending jobs and services. And that's not a political point, because the reality is if I don't have those jobs, I can't deliver those services. So I do think going forward there is a need to manage expectations in terms of what's actually deliverable. And as I said earlier, if I don't realise, or we can't realise, not for want of trying, some of those significant saving or income targets, then it could lead to pressures on services, which could lead to pressures on jobs. But so far I think there's significant confidence in being able to manage that. But as we've seen recently, things can come up quite quickly, quite suddenly, which can lead to us having to reassess our position. So energy costs, inflation, and some of those can impact quite significantly as well on the capital programme. And I know I'm here to talk about the revenue pressures. So I do think going forward it's a positive position, but not without some risks that could impact on services going forward, because the reality is if I don't achieve one thing, I'll have to find it from somewhere else.
Thank you very much, all of you, for a very full report there. Thanks for that. Obviously, we'll move on to some questions, any areas that you might want more information on, you think may not have been touched on. So I'll go to the first question, well, first two questions from Councillor Cox. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. You recognise the financial constraints and impact that are affecting everyone, including local authorities, due to a number of contributive factors. Can the committee be assured that the budget can meet central government policy and directives?
Where do you start? There's millions of statutory requirements that are presented on the services that the council deliver, and then there's a myriad of regulatory requirements that underpin that. The art of management is largely about ensuring that that we're finding that sweet spot between the stated requirements within the legislation and regulation and the resources we have, and that is part of the challenge we've got in bringing the two together. Yeah, I thought about in terms of we set out as part of our quarterly report and as response to the corporate plan as well, service standards. So that sweet spot that I've just talked about in terms of delivery, we're thinking about what resources we have allocated as part of the budget and what we can deliver in relation to those service standards, and then from that, then you oversee our the effectiveness of delivering against that. So I think there's not a black and white answer to this one. We endeavour to meet the spirit of legislatively requirements. So I'll just pick out a random one, which is probably my favourite one, which is about the adequate library provision. In the 64 Act, it talks about needing to provide an adequate library provision. What it doesn't say is how it must be delivered. And the sweet spot I'm describing is that we need to understand about, and which we do as part of the corporate plan and service planning, is we think about the needs of the citizens of the borough and the resources that we've got available to us, be it both assets, Dan's just touched on some of that, the human resources, we've got the people, and the resources, the budget that we operate within, in order to ensure that we provide the best we can with the value for money in mind in terms of that delivery. So there's no real hard answer as to do we do it to, I'd probably say we do it to our best of ability based on the resources we have, and we, based on the feedback, the directions that we get from political governance, be of your scrutiny or cabinet or budget council, we operate within the financial environment that we're allowed to.
Thank you. Can you outline the key investments in the capital programme that will achieve our corporate policies? Could you please provide examples of our short and long-term pressures and what is being undertaken to address them?
I'll start from an overall perspective in terms of the capital programme, and then Debbie or Dan might want to pick up in terms of, you know, how we're managing the pressures, what we're doing in terms of particular projects, for example. So I think, you know, as we've talked about, the capital programme is focused on must-dos from a health and safety perspective, and also where, you know, government grants are being allocated for specific kind of, you know, like the Levelling Up, the Towns Fund, etc. And that's really what's kind of included in our capital programme. So it is, what we're trying to do is look at the assets that we need to deliver our services moving forward and make sure that there's the funding for those assets so that they're maintained, etc., as they need to. But as Dan said, in terms of those assets that we, you know, we might not need, we can't afford to kind of maintain them all. So it's about just focusing where we can in terms of what the priorities are. For example, you know, we've had numerous conversations about the, you know, the bridges investment, the footpaths, and the number of schemes that we could deliver. You know, if we had more money, there'd be a lot more in there, but we're having to do it on a health and safety basis. So there is probably less than ideal. But as Debbie said at the beginning, where we funded it from our corporate resources, there's a cost to that. There's a borrowing cost. So that means that, you know, it's the impact on the revenue budget. I would say in terms of the current programme, Julie talked about the housing investment, you know, in terms of achieving EPCC, there's the acquisitions, etc. There's also, from Rihanna's perspective, in terms of education and leisure, public health. So there's a number of schemes in there where we need to achieve the priorities, particularly focused on from a health and safety perspective. I think short and longer term pressures, inflation, short term, but also, you know, those prices, we're not going to see deflation, are we? But hopefully they'll, well, if we see in terms of reducing in future, but again, that's a significant pressure. I think from a government grant funding, the timescales to deliver, you know, some of these schemes is a massive challenge, and that may be something that Debbie or Dan want to kind of pick up really on. And as I said, in terms of the longer term pressures on the capital programme, it's the things that we're not able to do, you know, the things that are potentially building up that we keep reviewing on an annual basis. But it is that at some point there will be needed, and we need to kind of just, it's that balance that we're always talking about in terms of managing that balance and doing as much we can with resources we've got. So I don't know whether Debbie or Dan want to pick up in terms of individual project.
Probably just want to emphasise that the majority of our programme is specific funding. It comes down from either SIMCA, that relates to road improvements and sort of environmental improvements, and we've got monies that comes from in relation to education. We get significant amount of money in relation to Towns Fund levelling up. These are all quite directive in terms of where the resources need to go, and it puts a lot of pressure on the organisation with the sort of resources that we have. I sort of think Leanne asked the question earlier about it was directed, underlying was about capacity and the skills that we have, or the skills shortages that we have. We're sort of balancing that need to deliver on really quite challenging projects with a finite level of resources that we have in the council. So that to some extent dictates where not only the resources from the council that we can direct on our own assets, because first and foremost, the government usually, like the levelling up 3, which we've just had notification of, it's got a 2-year window to deliver that £17 million with match funding. So that's a significant challenge really for the organisation. Capital schemes are really complex, usually working with other partners, and they do take longer than 2 years. So there is a real challenge in terms of, so first and foremost from a priority point of view, we will maximise resources coming to the council via those other streams, and then look to delivering on the projects that we have. So that's sort of the environment we're operating within.
If I could, Chair, just build on what Debbie's said. I think that the extent of the external funding that we've got for some of the capital programme for the big ticket impactful schemes is not to be misunderstood. So I just kind of tallying up what we've got, but in over £100 million worth of funding, if you include some of the sustainable transport funding through the MCA, you're talking over 150, almost 200 million, which is in some respects a fortuitous dilemma to have, because other places haven't got quite as much. They haven't got 2 town deals, they haven't had 2 lots of LUF. Pressures in getting it out the door is always an issue for us, because whenever we're given the money, the reality is the starter gun has gone. And one of the challenges we face as well is that costs increase. So what we might have thought might have cost us X amount of million at a particular point in time where the money was secured or the bid was made, because of the external factors in the market, have gone up by the time we get to deliver. So that is a real challenge for us. But what I would say is it's a positive challenge, it's a good challenge, but it's not without its difficulties and complexities. And I would concur with Debbie's statement about capacity, because if you don't have capacity, what happens if you don't have capability? So we really do need to make sure we can bend and flex some of our resources to match these big ticket schemes, because as you see now, particularly in the city centre, and there are wider areas of investment across the borough, but particularly in the city centre, you are now starting to see some of that change. And over the next 3 to 5 years, there will be significant changes in investment, which will be tangible and visible. But it's going to take some time and some effort, and I think some blood, sweat and tears, hopefully not in equal measure, to get there.
Thank you for that. If we move on to Councillor Cobby for your question, Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. Following those questions, to what extent has the right level of reserves, balances and contingencies been determined bearing in mind current pressures? So, for example, can reserves respond to the unknowns, like extreme weather, which our committee has touched on quite a bit?
To come on the particular level in relation to... We'll do that. Okay, thought so.
Thank you. As Section 151, it's my responsibility to give a positive assurance really in terms of the level of reserves and state whether it's adequate to meet the known commitments and contingencies based on the information available. So that is included in the report in terms of my assurance from a Section 1 perspective. The overall approach is to maintain the level of uncommitted reserves. We're expected to remain at the 12.6 million. The only allocation we've made from the uncommitted reserves this year has been in terms of the complex abuse investigation from a children's perspective, and that's consistent with previous years. So where we can maintain that level, that's the the priority from our perspective. The report includes a risk assessment in terms of the use of the reserves. So we have a look at how the likelihood of overspends, how robust the budget proposals are. We have a look at provisions, contingencies that we've kind of got in there really, and just have a really good look at, if we were going to have a look at and assess the risks to the council, what would they equate to. And we've identified about 9 million, so that's less than the reserves that are available, so leave some scope as well for unforeseen events. I think we're also, in the report it talks about, we are targeting additional savings in 24-25, bearing in mind the number of risks, the volatility that we've seen. You'll have heard a number of the directors talk about the volatility in terms of the pressures, Dan, the energy increases, etc. So we need to maintain, we definitely need to maintain that, contingency in the current environment. We've also got earmarked reserves for specific, for specific purposes, detailed there in Appendix H. So if therefore, known things that are coming up, anticipated future spend, but if something did happen, then they could be called upon, some of those, if needed. I also just wanted to mention in terms of there's the Bellwin scheme as well, which is available for an emergency or disaster involving destruction or danger for life. So we've used it in the past for kind of floods. That's where spend is above a certain limit, so it's about £500,000. So if the council incurs spend on those kind of disasters, emergencies, then the Bellwin scheme's available there as well. So there's a number of things at our disposal, but the overall approach is to maintain our reserves at the current level.
Thank you very much. That section was about looking at how the Mayor's proposals are in line with central government policy pressures and directives. We've got another section here. To what extent will the Mayor's proposals ensure that the Council is able to contribute to the outcomes detailed within Doncaster Delivering Together, bearing in mind the constraints detailed at one above? We've had some very full answers, so if you think anybody, I need to start. Sorry, Antoinette, did you want to say something?
It was just a question. I was quite disappointed to hear about the funding on public health, and given that is clearly part of an early intervention strategy that works or can work really well. How much opportunity does the council have for partnership working or ability to influence efficiencies in working either within the NHS or the NHS's partnership with the council?
So there's a few things. Yeah, the ring fence grant allocations are set nationally as a national allocation budget. We do work across NHS partners as well. We've got a particular set of duties of things that we must commission and be responsible for, but there is opportunity for services to work better, things to work better with shared investment. Unfortunately, you'll find that financial pressures are hitting across health services as well, but we've probably got a good couple of examples of where we're able to work, or where we have worked together to meet some of those efficiencies, but also to make services feel and work better. But would say that reduction in investment overall does represent a lack of opportunity really for us to make that real strong investment in prevention and early response.
Do you feel there's a deep willingness of the NHS to work with the council to ensure those efficiencies take place or things aren't duplicated?
NHS partners would probably be able to answer that better, but I do think that ICB partners do understand that both moral and economic argument for early approaches and for prevention approaches. They themselves will have things like a health inequalities budget that can be leveraged, used for that prevention type approach too. Equally, if they were responding to you now, they would describe the raft of financial pressures that they're experiencing themselves as well. With that very same backdrop that we've got changing population, growing population, increasing inequalities as well. So being able to portion their spend to their competing demands too. But where there are opportunities to work, we've got the necessary governance and I think relationships in place, but there's probably still a lot more that we could do.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll move on with the questions. If at any time you think your questions have been covered or you want to ask something slightly different, please feel free. So we'll just move on to Councillor Hempshaw. You've got some questions?
Thank you. I think we've covered quite a bit of it, but Firstly, is the budget adequate for services to deliver the right outcomes and achieve the priorities set out in the Doncaster Delivering Together? And the second one is around which areas face the most significant challenge, and has this been taken into account with the attached proposals?
Yes, if anybody wants to highlight things that haven't already been touched on, that'd be great. Debbie, did you want to answer?
Yeah, what I would say is the borough strategy is a conglomerate of ours and others' responsibility. So it's the corporate plan, the next level up, is basically the borough strategy. So the contribution, the budget that we have and the corporate plan that we have, it sets out the council's ambitions in that regard. We see that as part of the contributions to those longer term ambitions, and we work with partners in order for them to set out what as part of their planning processes in order to so there's like a bringing together of all the component parts. Our plans are certainly in the direction because we've got that alignment between, as I say, our corporate plan and the borough strategy, and we work with other partners in order to ensure that that's the case. Whether it actually we achieve all of what we set out, because there's some real aspirational targets within the borough strategy and that delivering Doncaster Together, but we are certainly we have effective arrangements for ensuring efficacy of the different partners and the working arrangement. So we've got the ambitions there. Whether we achieve everything will remain to be seen because of the challenges we've talked about. In terms of the most significant challenges, I think you've heard from colleagues in relation to that. You know, I would pick out children and adults in particular because they're they represent a significant proportion of the council's budget. I think, is it 60 something %? And so consequently, the risks that you've heard and the pressures that they've got in terms of managing within the statutory environment that Steve asked about right at the beginning of the meeting is a real challenge. And then I think as others, I think Dan mentioned about delivering savings, we have over a number of years, at least 10, exploited, I guess, made all the savings that are more easier to achieve. And we are really now having to go into the areas where we need to work more with other people about how we can do more with less. And that's in part that's why Faye referred to when in your response to the question about reserves, about the fact that we need to consider the level of reserves in that environment, because we need to protect and have reserves that we can bring in order to offset any non-achievement of savings, because as you know, as everybody knows, we need to deliver a balanced budget. So I think it's quite a complex environment that we're operating in, but hopefully you appreciate the sort of different components and how they all come together, but equally what the risks that they present as well.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. We're just looking on to section 3. To what extent do the Mayor's proposals demonstrate the results of any consultation, research or other evidence have been taken into account? Councillor Kearsley, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you. What consultation, research or other evidence has been used to develop the budget strategy? Are there any sort of particular examples you could highlight and what the outcome that it resulted in was, please?
I'll start this off, but effectively we, as part of the budget formulation, we're basically building up the budget based on coming back to the statutory requirements and service delivery. So we're building a base budget up from that point onwards. Where there's organisational change required as part of any savings, we've got a statutory requirement to undertake the consideration of a sort of consultation as part of that proposal. So I would say that we don't do it we engage with people. Like on Thursday, we've got the Chamber of Commerce meeting. So there's lots of different mechanisms that we have for engaging with the budget per se. But in terms of where we're getting quite detailed about the impact it has, it's really where there is service changes that we're most minded. I think in terms of the report itself, there's a section that sets out our duty, a quality duty, and what we do as part of the budget formulation, we consider where there's significant service changes and where they might take place. Services, as part of when they're making those changes, will undertake those due regard assessments, and they will be reported on. The process that they have for engaging, undertaking consultation is largely dependent on the nature of the changes. So I would say it's proportionate. If it was a significant and impactful to service delivery, then that would need to be really quite detailed and engaging. Something that's more, let's say, organisational, a restructure, there's a less need for it. So that's sort of set out in the paperwork that's included within the budget report.
Thank you.
To move on, Councillor Cox, I think you're taking the next question.
Yeah, there's a list of names beyond that one, isn't there? What assumptions evidence has been used to project income for fees, charges and collection funds? Sorry, I'm full of snot. In housing, rent, businesses, car parks, charges, council tax.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. As Debbie kind of said, you know, in terms of building up the budget, we start with what we have to deliver. We also look at what income we have to deliver. So a key area of income funding councils is council tax and business rates. This is a key focus for us. We undertake detailed reviews quarterly. We monitor the collection. We monitor, you know, where we're at with growth. We monitor overall collection fund. So we do it during the year, and then as we're kind of producing the budget, we're kind of also looking to the longer term as well. So all the assumptions are detailed in the Appendix A of the report, which is the MTFS. In terms of monitoring that in year, council tax in-year collection is slightly less than the target for 23-24. We're currently looking at about 94% for the year end, and our target is 94.6%. So that's slightly lower than ideally where we would like, but we take that into account in terms of the overall collection fund. Business rates is looking really positive. That's better than probably it's ever been. And we're currently at 97.46, so slightly exceeding the target of 97.3%. So we're constantly reviewing these particular areas. In terms of business rates, growth is slightly lower. It takes longer to deliver what we're finding, but it does deliver. So in terms of that overall sustainable position, we are managing to deliver over the period, but it's just slightly later date. The big difference in business rates is the removal of the one-off surplus, which was for last year, so that's affecting the overall figure. But in terms of the assumptions, the evidence, it's a constant review, particularly focused on the big areas. Fees and charges increasing by 6.7%, which was based on inflation, so September inflation. And what we do is, as we're reviewing the impact of that increase, we're kind of working with services to kind of understand the activity levels. If activity levels are, you know, significant drop in, will that, you know, adversely impact on, you know, the number of people buying the services, etc. So where we can mitigate, we kind of have a look at that, because there's no point charging more but getting less bought. It's a, you know, negative impact overall. So we need to manage that and review that across the board. But I think it is helpful to have a, you know, a standard charge to fees and charges rather than kind of 2%, 10%, you know, overall. So we do set that overall target, but then where there are exceptions, those are detailed in the report.
Thank you very much. The next section is to what extent are the challenges of delivering the savings within the timescales and the capacity to deliver services with reduced resources being addressed. I know we've touched on this a lot. there's a question around the asset rationalisation programme. Would you like further information on this, Gemma?
Yes,
yeah,
please,
of course,
Chair.
yeah.
So, if I know Dan's touched on a lot of it already on asset rationalisation programme already, but I'm happy, would like to hear a bit more if there's any information, Dan, that you can provide, or Debbie or Faye, about what policies are in place to undertake this, and any further more information on the challenges and risks associated.
Debbie, did you want to cover? No, well, I thought, given this, you're kind of dealing with the administrative strategic elements of delivering the programme, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the officer group and what's been done, and the fact that we've done the audits in particular areas, and the focus on what we found from the south.
Yeah, I think picking up on the key point, it is a significant challenge. We've already got a reduced asset base, and we know that we've got a smaller stock with the significant demands in relation to, I think as Julie referenced, we need to meet EPC standards. They've got significant backlog of maintenance, and they've got high running costs as a result of the fact that they've not had that type of investment. So that's the sort of the landscape, and as a result of that, we've got a programmed approach to examining the art of the possible, really, going forward. So we've segmented the borough into 4 localities in order to look through that lens, and we are considering the assets, their current utilisation, their cost, their as I've just said, the backlog of maintenance, in order to look at the most optimum solution in terms of more co-location. We're having lots of engagement with communities, ward members, and the people who use the buildings themselves, with a view to coming to a situation where we've got less, but the better quality assets remain with us, and then hooking that up to what Faye was talking about in terms of the capital programme, when we're clear about more the assets which are core, because we're categorising in my core, flex and tail, the core assets, potentially some of the flex assets. We've got a more of a programmed approach to ensuring that those are the buildings that we invest in going forward. So we've got an awful lot, not as much as we had in the past, but we've got an awful lot of work to do in order to reduce the asset base by nearly £1 million. The total cost is over 4 million. So in some areas, it's going to be a significant reduction in the assets we have available to us. But hopefully, the outcome should be that we have fewer but better quality and more utilised assets.
Can I just ask a question? We're saving money by reducing our assets, but what we're saving the money on is the maintenance of those buildings, that's right. And I know this isn't necessarily in the papers in front of us, but there was national headlines recently about councils being encouraged to sell assets to put it into the revenue budget. I don't know if you want to make any comments on that.
In terms of the process we've got, it's twofold. So we're in the first phase, really, of engagement and decision making. Once there is a decision to dispose, we've obviously got quite a bit of work to do in terms of making that become a reality. And then the third phase then drops into basically business as usual, because the council already has an obligation where it's got surplus assets to engage with partners, because there may be other partners that could utilise that. There may be other entities, parish councils or other people who are more wanted to take the assets on. And then there's community groups also as part of that. So the disposal part, I mean, the right for communities to come forward and express an interest about taking on community ownership and management isn't new. It's been around 10 plus more years, probably longer than that. I think the imperative is greater now, and that's hence the reason why it's being promoted more. But I guess through the work that we're doing, I want people to go into it eyes wide open, in part because we're statutory bodies, and I guess if we can't afford to maintain it and run it, I'd be speculative unless there's some door it opens, which I absolutely know, because there's, you know, other national funding sources such as big lottery funding, etc. But they're usually for high prestigious, national, significant or quirky types of applications. So we'll support as part of that 3-stage process. The 3rd stage, we will engage with community groups and other interested parties. But I'd really do want us to go into eyes wide open, that it's not going to be like a bit of a hospital pass for community groups to take things on and then realise they've put the heart and soul into something and it's still not solvable.
Could I add a question, comment? Obviously, I think that's one of my comments I was going to make, is about obviously the community groups. They'll need a lot of support for taking it on. However, we also heard about Rachel talk about gaps and trying to do that early, and also Rihanna as well, about that first initial step, which some of these buildings would be fantastic too, these community set buildings. So that's one. Are we working with partners, within different departments about those gaps in those areas? So if we lose, say, a place in the community section of rural Doncaster where they can't necessarily get in with buses, but if we use that opportunity to engage through those early steps, which might save a costing elsewhere, so having to come into, and also that social care, the early social care, and also the other parts that we're talking about, that preventative care, that might have a wider cost in a long time. Are we looking at those sort of discussions as well?
Where so we're doing quite a lot. I'll just give an example in Stainforth, where there's the working group is looking quite intensively, because there's quite a lot of assets in Stainforth, and it's a multidisciplinary group. So there's people on there from youth, there's people on there from adult services, as well as assets. So it's not been taken forward just through looking, computer says must have less assets. It's very much working in conjunction and doing that groundwork, understanding more about the services that are delivered and how they might continue but evolve. In the past there may have been an entity that's had exclusive access for, I'm going to say, like a library or something like that, but the approach we'll need to take going forward is very much about how we can all work together in order to, as I say, make the best out of the assets we have, optimise those, move them from a flex to a core, and then that's the way that they'll get future investment from the council. So we're clear about these are the core assets that we need that are sustainable going forward.
Yeah,
Sorry, did you want to come in at this stage, Dan?
If I could, Chair.
Yeah.
It was only very briefly to just concur and build on what Debbie said, just for purposes of clarity. It would be easy to call it an asset rationalisation programme, and to deliver asset rationalisation is traditionally you have a certain portfolio of assets, and when you've done the rationalisation you end up with less and you save money. That would make a savings target easier to do, but what it doesn't do is deal with what Debbie said and what Councillor Cobby have said, is that rationalisation should be about more productive use of the existing assets, embracing what the community need is within reality in terms of the funding envelope, but maximising the assets. Practically, I know one location where there are 3 very tired assets within walking distance of one another, all which cost the council heating and lighting and maintenance. But actually, if you took 2 of those out the frame and had one that was much better, providing you'd engage with the service provision and you've engaged with the community, it benefits all, because the community gets something better, the services get something better, and actually we have less costs or potentially a similar cost for doing something better. And where we can reduce costs is in the offset because of the service provision and the interaction with the community. So I think we need to capture that element as well, rather than just the reduction in heating and lighting and maintenance. It is a bit of a challenge for us because we've now got, I think, to the kind of more challenging stock in terms of its condition and usage. And as ever with these things, I wouldn't use the term winners and losers, but nobody likes to lose a facility, even if they're getting something reasonably new or better, because it's change, and sometimes change can be feared, so it needs to be understood as to what the rationalisation is for it. And that's the other point I would say, is if you're going to go down that method of maximising, it takes more time than just rationalising. So I think that's one of my concerns in terms of the delivery of the saving as well, because there is quite a high target in there for the delivery of savings from the asset review programme.
Can I just ask, I understand why we need to do it and everything else, but would there be an opportunity to sort of like consolidate buildings? So if you've got a community centre and a library, put the library in the community centre or vice versa?
That's exactly it. The consolidation, so you actually maximise the assets that you've got. And actually what you could do is use some of that revenue cost that you've got for heating and lighting to perhaps invest in some of the facilities. But it has to be a balanced, judgment. But yeah, the consolidation is key, I think.
Thank you.
Faye, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, just quickly, I think just to say in terms of the Section 151 assessment of the robustness of the budget proposals, the asset rationalisation is highlighted in there as kind of a red in terms of delivery because it is high risk. So I just kind of wanted committee members just to understand really in terms of that overall risk. The RAG ratings that are included in there, a high risk one is the asset rationalisation. However, I do think the approach is sustainable, and just coming back to your question in terms of the capital receipts, the approach is, like I said, to consolidate where we can, to reduce those running costs and reduce those future, high maintenance costs, which has a significant borrowing cost, and it would impact on the revenue budget. So it's about a sustainable approach, but is more difficult to deliver. In terms of the capital receipt, we haven't included a capital receipt for those assets because what we found in the past is we had a capital receipt target and we were just not achieving it each year. So what we don't want to do is build in a target in terms of the budget that potentially isn't achievable. So if capital receipts are realised, then we can look to utilise those capital receipts, or we could take an assessment in terms of potential capital receipts and use them as part of that business case or as part of that decision. So I just wanted to kind of make committee members clear really in terms of the assumptions in relation to capital receipts, and that's not, I suppose, the key driver as part of this. It's that ongoing sustainable position.
Yeah, Councillor Smith, you think your question's been answered. That's right, isn't it? So, Leanne, do you want to ask a bit more about the high needs block?
Yeah, thank you. I had a question around concerns around the overspend of the high needs block, but rather than call it an overspend, I'd like to call it an underfund. That's not me being political, it's a problem nationally and it's an absolute fact. But as a result, do we risk having a generation of young people being failed as a consequence of insufficient funding of the higher needs block by central government? And the second part of it is, to what extent do we feel the academy model could be creating the 41% increase in EHCPs?
How to taste the director, hey? Thank you, Councillor Ameshaw. So your first question around, are we failing children? We are doing our best not to fail children. And we are trying to make the best decisions for children on an individual basis, but also then move the system around to accommodate the need for the future. So on an individual basis, we are trying to be more in a co-productive space. We want to consider how our education, health and care, the quality of our education, health and care plans, and how all of the partners in education, health and care contribute to a plan that works for a young person. That also means that in that plan there will be provisions named to support that young person, whether that's speech and language provision or whether that's a place in a special school or whatever that is. And it's in that space that we then need to carefully consider how we commission services for the broader population as such. And how do we make, and then on the other side, how do we make it really bespoke for those young people? So we try to do our best within the resources that we have. The high needs block is overspent, but because we're trying to meet need. So it isn't, you know, hopefully there's nobody left behind as such, but we are trying to manage it as best we can. So that's the first part of your question. Second part of your question, does the academy system contribute to it? I actually don't think it does. I think it's the SEND policy, the special educational needs policy that came out about 10 years ago with a code of practice, where there was significant indications to government that we are getting the policy wrong. So for example, you can only access funding really through a EHCP. That then drives up the numbers of people applying for education, health and care plan, because it's the only way of accessing additional funding. So there are so I don't think it is the academy system. I think it's the policy that needs to change on a national level around how we deal and support children with special educational needs in school, and where they can't be supported in mainstream school, how do we help them in other more suitable provisions, which is also hybrid. So, you know, they could be partly in mainstream, they could be accessing alternative provision at the same time. So it's all of those kind of things rather than the academy system.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you for that. But I'm sort of getting at more about things surrounding uniform and behavioural policies within academies that, as you can imagine, are not suitable for some children and young people with special educational needs.
So, and that's why we're working very hard on our graduated approach locally. The issue that we do have is sometimes national multi-academy trusts operate within the locality, and therefore at times there are standardized policies and procedures that are implemented across the whole of the country, and not necessarily tailored to our specific needs. It's really important for us to engage those schools on a local level to help them understand the graduated approach and help them understand how they manage behaviour better. We don't have jurisdiction on telling academies how they should be doing that, but we're working really hard collaboratively to try and influence as much as we can.
Yep, thank you for that.
Annette, you've got a question?
Thank you. Just a quick one. You talked about a £2 million saving this coming year.
So we got grant funding from the DfE to implement our plans further, to take our plans in terms of reducing the overspend, to take our plans further. And for that, if we implement those things, we will see a slowdown of £2 million a year from 2025 onwards for 3 years. So it will make some difference, but not a significant impact.
Will it ensure that the increasing deficit remains static, or is it just slowing the deficit down?
At this point in time, I have to say it's going to slow it down.
Okay, thank you very much for answering those questions, Rihanna. I could just ask Councillor Cobber, you probably the last question, I think. I've got a question around net zero.
Yes, I know Julie touched on it from the St Ledger point of view, but how does the proposal address the existing and additional pressures on the environmental net zero within the council?
There's a very practical example within the report, actually, of how the budget supports some of those pressures, because there's reference to the procurement or requirement to get a revised IT or new IT system in place for both waste and street sea. And the reason I raise that is obviously because in relation to both those two, but particularly in relation to waste, that demonstrates commitment within this budget to maintaining some of the environmental targets that we've got. Because as you know, waste is a big part of any sustainability agenda. So clearly a commitment there to maintain services that are integral to delivery of the carbon neutrality and target by 2040, and also just maintaining the place being clean and green. The other point I would like to say is that, you know, there is a reserve in relation to the sustainability of the agenda, and it would have been easy for us to look at taking some resources out of that. So the commitment has been maintained to the use of that £5 million, which was a mayoral commitment. for me, at a service level, I think the challenge is just making sure that we retain the pressure and focus on delivering a sustainability agenda when we've got other things hitting us. Like I said earlier, you know, over £100 million of funding to get out the door. So it's essential that we don't lose focus on what is a key corporate commitment. But I would say that this authority is committed to delivering its sustainability agenda, has put resources in place to do that, and has maintained that commitment despite year-on-year significant budget pressures. And we've continued to deliver, you know, the Mayor's Tree programme, the housing retrofit stuff that we've done, which I know Julie would have spoke about perhaps a little more if she was here. So I think there's been a financial commitment, but also a maintained political commitment and commitment with the Officer Corps to deliver that.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think we've come to the end of this bit of the agenda. So recommendations, paragraph 3, page 29, that the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee consider and respond to the Mayor's draft budget proposals, adopts the key questions identified at paragraph 8 as focus for its review, adopts the guidance details at paragraph 12 and 13 for effectively reviewing the Mayor's budget proposals. So, is the Mayor's budget proposal supported?
Supported.
Seconded? Thank you. And
can I move the chair? We agree the letter in response to the proposals on behalf of the committee. Do I have a seconder, please?
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have, as usual, got the Overview and Scrutiny Work Plan and the Council's Forward Plan, which I briefly went through the other day. If anybody wants to raise anything that they've particularly seen, I've just made a few notes as we were going along, and these are sort of possibilities that we might be feeding into a work plan at some stage. I'm not suggesting by any chance that they all get taken up. It's just things that occurred to me as I went along. I mean, I've got assets disposal, but on the other hand, we don't want them spending all the time feeding back to us when we're getting on with disposing of them. Mentioned duplication of services and partnership working. I thought that was interesting. We're all very interested in the growing our own agenda and how that's working. The increase in the educational health EHCP plans that are going up like mad, that's a big issue. And the unaccompanied asylum seeker children, that was of grave concern. We talked about being a leader in employing disabled people. Somebody mentioned complex families. Those cases are going up and more early help is needed. What else have I got? Yeah, the fact that in Doncaster itself stands out for people not staying in their own home and moving into care homes, which is obviously a big factor in our overspend. So if anybody, I mean, you know, that's not a definitive list by any chance. It's just things I jotted as we were going along. So has anybody got anything they want to say on that or anything that they want to contribute?
Oh, sorry, Chair. It'd be good to revisit. I know I've put it down for communities environment potentially for next year's work plan, but I know you touched on it briefly, but the community prevention model, because obviously you talked about corporate, it'd be good to get an update on that.
Can I just add to what you're saying, Councillor Kidd? I think it's important what Councillor Smith brought up about the, you know, sort of doing reasonable adjustments from interview level and upwards and looking at, you know, the numbers that we do employ as an organisation, and probably look at work experience for young people as well before they get into that bracket of adult social care. And just reminding everybody of the disability charter that full council signed up to. So that aligns with all that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have finished the agenda then, haven't we? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thank you.